Hoorah! Hello, I'm Zaccura and welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Study Sessions. I still haven't settled on a good name. Sorry. So this is a little series thing that I'm doing where I do my own personal drawing studying sessions and record them and then share them with you all and talk about what I did and what I learned from it and whatnot. So for the last study session video, which was the first of this series thing, I did hand studies and I asked you guys what other subjects you wanted to see me study, and you all gave some really great suggestions. I have a bunch on the list now, but the most mentioned one was poses, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. Now when it comes to poses, there are so many different things to study because of how many different types of poses there are, but for today I decided to study action poses, and the model, I guess you could say, is a female, sort of a strongish lady. We'll call her Laura. Not really sure why I decided to go with a female physique, but it was really just that I wanted them to all be the same, like every single pose to be the same like body. And for me personally, I find drawing both male and female anatomy to be equally difficult. Like, I know for some artists they may find drawing girls to be more difficult or drawing boys to be more difficult, but I suppose I just kind of always practiced both pretty equally, so for me it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And also this study session was more pose focused rather than anatomy focused, as I will get a bit more into that in a bit. But the people in the references I used varied quite a bit, and so actually I think sticking to this one body type for drawing helped me better understand the poses themselves rather than the individual pictures that I was referencing, because I was forced to really like break down each pose. So when I went to look up action pose references, I immediately noticed one thing, and that was it wasn't very easy to find photo references of real people for many of the poses. And I ended up finding myself faced with a whole lot of action pose sheets that other artists have made for people to reference. And when I do studies, I tend to like to use like real people rather than drawings, and that's something I would like wholeheartedly recommend to other people as well for many reasons. But a big one is simply because if you're referencing a drawing, there's always the possibility that that artist themselves made some mistakes, and by using their drawings as reference, you end up picking up all their mistakes as well. Now, I definitely could have kept looking through the internet to find actual people references because they're definitely out there for sure. But for this study session, I decided to be a bit more loose with the references and ended up using a bunch of different sources. Some were photos of real people, some were 3D models, and some were study sheet drawings. And the reason was because, as I mentioned, I was studying poses, not anatomy or proportions. And when it comes to poses, it's a lot more about the flow rather than the basic shapes, which I know when I was doing the hand study session last time, I was like all about them basic shapes. And if I was studying anatomy or proportions, I would be like totally preaching about how important they are once again. But for these poses, I was trying to better understand the flow of the human body, the way it twists and turns and balances itself when it's doing different things, and really leaving most of the anatomy up to me, just like what I already know about drawing this type of body. So, like, again, there's so many things to study when it comes to the human figure, and I feel like within this study session series, there's probably going to be quite a few revolving around the different body types, anatomy, different poses, flow, perspective, and so on, because humans are weird and complicated things that take a lot of understanding to draw properly. So when it came to picking the poses I was going to draw, I gave myself two criteria to follow, and that was, one, it had to be action-y, because I wanted to do action poses, so clearly that's obvious. And two, it had to be difficult for me because I tend to not vary my poses very much in my drawings, and that kind of needs to change. So that meant a lot of angles I don't usually draw and perspective, because that's usually what trips me up a bit, and it wouldn't be much of a study session if it wasn't a bit challenging. So at this point in the video, you may have noticed that I'm working on a new canvas than the one that I was working on in the beginning of the video. And the reason is because the poses you see here were drawn just from my head, whereas the 10 poses on the previous canvas were all referenced from photos, images, and so forth. And this is something I did last time for the hand references as well. It's just nice to see the differences between when you draw something from reference versus from memory, from your head. The ones from my head always tend to be a bit more stylized. One problem I ran into when I did the poses from my head was that I couldn't come up with poses. I guess it's just because they're just poses out of context. Like, if I was drawing a character, then I'd probably be able to come up with something based off of the personality of the character. But with, what did I name her? Laura, I just didn't have any ideas. So 2 of them ended up being pretty much the same, with her like holding a staff behind her, because as I was drawing the pose, I felt the staff was fitting, maybe? And once I did 5 poses from my head, I decided I was done with this study session and I was going to move on to doing the line work. As I mentioned in the first study sessions video, I do the line work as a way of forcing myself to commit to one line, because when I struggle to draw something, I tend to draw lines, like a million lines in the same area, and things are like really messy and stuff like that. So forcing yourself to commit to one line, I found, is pretty important. And plus, since I'm doing it digitally, I get some practice into doing line work, which has become very handy. I like doing line work now. Though I must say, I kind of cheated a little bit with the line work in this case, because I set my pen to be pretty thick. So, you know, I'm committing to one line, but they're like very thick lines. So when it came to composing these poses, I found that it was most helpful, useful for me when I was able to just like really quick get the overall rough composition, like skeleton of the pose, because I find it a lot easier, like once I already have something on the canvas, to sort of alter it and then add the details and sort of there, once I already kind of have the whole pose on the paper or on the computer screen. So usually, as you could see, I have how I start each pose is I usually started with like a line that was just kind of, and I call that the flow line. I don't know what it's called, but it's just basically like the spine, kind of like for the back, for the torso, that kind of shows like how does the torso twist. And then sometimes I would add like these circles, like a circle for the upper body section and a circle for the hip section. And then sometimes I would even like put skeletons for the legs and the arms individually with circles for the joints. But sometimes I would just go right into just drawing the legs, because I would, you know, whatever felt easier at that moment for that pose. But I pretty much always use spheres for the joints. Like I would always, like if I would draw the upper part, the bicep of the arm, once I reached the elbow, I would like draw a sphere, and then because that just helps me like wrap my head around like, okay, this is the sphere, this is where the rest of the arm can come out of, and it just like, it helps me understand it better. And yeah, that's pretty much all the guidelines that I use when it comes to getting the poses down. And one last thing is that I sometimes, if I need to know, like, to wrap my head around which direction a segment of the body is facing in particular, like with the chest, if the chest and the hips are like different and they're facing in different directions, and sometimes I'll just quickly draw a cross, because that just helps me understand which direction something is facing in. Hence the reason why all the heads have the Madness Combat cross, because I know that way exactly which direction the heads are facing in. Have you guys ever played Madness Combat? So this study session from start to finish took me an overall time of nearly 5 hours. And that was almost in one sitting. I actually remember like I was drawing and then like I ate lunch and then came back to finish. So yeah, it was a big part of my day. And in the end, I still only had like 15 poses, and so that's like, you know, 20 minutes or something like that per pose, average math, yeah. Which is about like 2 or 3 times longer than my normal sketches, my normal drawings. But my normal sketches and drawings usually have pretty average poses that I've done lots of times, so I've gotten very quick at them. These poses definitely gave me a lot of trouble. I think the majority of those 20 minutes per pose was spent on just erasing and redrawing and just scratching my head about like, dang it, I can't get this dang arm right. Definitely the biggest difficulty for me, surprise, surprise, was the perspective. I always know that for me, perspective is always very difficult. In particular with the arms, like that pose, that second pose that I did with her holding those 2 swords, the dual swords, I had to erase those arms so many times because it was so hard for me to get it right. And one thing that I noticed also about doing perspective poses or foreshortening in poses is that the longer you spend on it, the weirder things start to look. And until eventually you're just stuck in this like trap of like, what the heck, this looks so weird, and you keep erasing it and redrawing it and erasing and redrawing it, and you just can't get it right. And once I noticed that this was starting to happen, what I did is I would only spend a certain amount of time on a pose, and if like there's a part where I'm like, I can't get it right, like a leg or an arm or something like that, I just kind of stopped and started on a new pose, or started working on a different pose for like a few minutes. And then when I would come back, it's like my eyes were kind of reset, and like I usually was able to like instantly fix it really quickly. So there's like something I learned from doing this, in particular with that pose on the bottom right of the first 10 poses, where she's like vaulting over a bar and her foot is coming up in the front. I could not get that front foot to save my life. Like, it was so hard to get that foot right, and I kept erasing and redrawing it, and it just wasn't working. And so what I did is I just stopped, and then I started working on a different pose, and then the moment I came back to it after like 2 minutes or something like that, I just instantly drew the front foot, and it was like, oh, that was easy. So there you go. If things are starting to look really weird and you're just like been staring at it for too long and it just keeps on looking really weird, it's probably just you getting too like meticulous about it. You've been staring at it for too long. So just like look away, you know, draw something else, look away for like a few minutes, then come back and try and fix it then. So overall, this was a very good study session. Even though it was hard, it was fun. And there's something, I gotta say, there's something satisfying about like stepping back and being like, look at all those poses I just drew. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why you can see me doing the shading. I originally wasn't going to do shading because this wasn't like a shading practice session or something like that, but I was like, you know, I like these poses, I'm gonna slap on some shading on there, you know, extra practice, woohoo. And now the time has come for your buddy Zaccura to give you your homework. So the homework for this time is pretty similar to last time, and that is to do a 1-hour action pose study session. I know I went for 5 hours, well nearly 5 hours, but that's a bit long, and I don't want to subject you guys to that unless you're really feeling it like I was. Then, you know, go as long as you like, bro. But 1 hour is a nice wholesome time, not too long, also not too short. But again, like always, just go as long or as short as you like, you know, whatever fits into your schedule. And the criteria for the poses is they gotta be action-y. They don't have to be the same poses I did, but as long as it's something along the lines of action. This can be running, jumping, fighting stances, powering up stances, whatever you feel like. And while you can go ahead and do what I did and use pre-drawn references for some of your poses, try to have at least one pose that was referenced from an actual person photograph. And also try to stay away from like finished illustrations for reference, as in like drawings that weren't intended by the artist to be used for reference. Like you're looking for the ones that just have a bunch of blank poses on them, you know, not like characters or something like that. Kind of like my end result, actually. As a matter of fact, if you guys want to use this reference sheet I made for your own practice, y'all can go right ahead. And then finally, do at least one pose that is completely made up from your head. If you're having some trouble looking for good poses, I can recommend searching for parkour poses, kung fu poses, fighting poses, and just action poses. I really hope y'all will give this study session a shot. It's really satisfying, a lot of fun, and super great practice. And if you do your homework, tag me with it on social media or just let me know because I would love to see it. Or not, you know, if you don't feel like it, you know, whatever. All the links to my socials are down in the description box. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Study with Your Butt. No, I need a better name. Which pose was your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions or ideas for future study sessions, also let me know. Would you like me to do another pose study with a male body, or are there specific poses like, I don't know, dancing poses that you'd like me to do? Whatever. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you did enjoy this video in any way, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. I post new videos every Sunday, and until next time, stay awesome, stay inspired, always. See ya!